up on the First Take podcast is a special day here as the fantasy football marathon continues. Why does Aaron Rodgers think it's hard for NFL players to speak up on social issues? We'll discuss that, and we'll tell you which quarterbacks, wideouts, and running backs will lead the league this season. Mark Schlereth, Adam Schefter, Matthew Berry, Terrell Owens, all joining us to help you get ready for that fantasy draft. Let's get it started.
Gentlemen, my father always impressed on me that before you can exist as an individual, the first thing you have to accept is duty. The second thing is respect for authority. And the third thing is to develop a strong mental discipline. Gentlemen, we're going to have a football team, and we're going to win some football games. You know why? You're going to have confidence in me and my system. By being alert, you're going to make fewer mistakes than your opponents. By working harder, you're going to out-execute, out-block, and out-tackle every opponent that comes your way. I've never been a losing coach, and I don't intend to start now. Now, Max, Molly, and Steven, the quality of life is a full measure of your personal commitment to excellence and to victory, not only in football, but in every endeavor.
Let's get it cracking. Let's start the session. March list the competition, balls by that action. You can never debate it. This is actual fact. Stephen A. and Max Kale said they say it's a rap. I'm like, say what? Say what? What's up with all my haters? I'm a ball when I perform. So my jersey's in the air. I'm allergic to my haters. Every morning I prepare. Lot of clothes I can wear just like them Oregon players. Yeah, quack, quack. What it do? Rap like it's nothing to it. Matter of fact, you can ask hard and I'm cooking too. Base guard cooking too. Nah, look at you. Great mind. They embrace mine like a crooked two. 4 takes, that's you. 3 takes, not me. 2 takes if you lucky. First take, stop me. 4 takes, that's you. 3 takes, not me. 2 takes if you lucky. First take, you got me.
Oh, hello there. Welcome into First Take, a very special day. It is hour number 16 and our 28 hours of fantasy as we take the baton from Mike and Mike. We are really excited to be a part of the Fantasy Football Marathon presented by DraftKings. A lot of guests will be joining us, including Matthew Berry, Mark Schlereth, and our Adam Schefter.
We're getting updates as we speak.
Yes.
Stephen A., what's going on? Molly?
Max,
how you doing? Welcome to the show.
What's up, big boy?
I would never know you didn't sleep. Full of energy, ready to go.
Honestly, slept about 10, 15 minutes, a little cat nap about 4 in the morning.
Wow.
Feel as if it doesn't matter. Sleep's overrated.
There we go.
See, I disagree. I think sleep is underrated by people like you.
Sleep is overrated. Let's have an argument about it. Let's debate whether sleep is necessary or not.
We're just happy we have you. And because of you, look at this. We've already reached over 1 million drafted teams on ESPN.com. Off to a great start
That's
here.
because of Matthew Berry.
Yes. Matthew Berry, too, will be with us later. We're looking forward to that. But, guys, we're going to start in reality with some NFL news, so let's get into it. The NFL has told 4 players that they will be suspended indefinitely if they do not cooperate with the league's investigation into allegations linking them to steroids. Steelers linebacker James Harrison, Packers linebackers Clay Matthews and Julius Peppers, and free agent linebacker Mike Neal were given until August 25th to submit interviews. Allegations about the players were made in an Al Jazeera documentary that also implicated Peyton Manning, who was cleared by the league after his retirement. The Players Association had previously said there's no evidence to merit an investigation. Last night, a spokesman said the NFLPA had no comment at this time. Stephen A., start with you here. Should the players have to meet with the NFL?
Without question, they absolutely should, and that's why I personally requested Adam Schefter that you be here in attendance for this, because I needed to talk to you and not just Max about my position here. Look, when it comes to things that involve monetary value, not to say that the players, anytime players suspension, obviously, you're going to cost them some money. But when you have an argument like the NFLPA won years ago when $100 million had to be added to their coffers, and each additional team had about $2 million in cap space or whatever the case may be, because they found out that the owners was kind of, trying to shortchange. I understand those arguments. What has some members of the Players Association against me at times is that I look at disciplinary measures as it pertains to the power of the commissioner of the National Football League. And I say, what's the fighting about? This kind of stuff to me is stuff that negatively affects the players' dollars, because you're a union rep, you're the executive director of the Players Association in DeMaurice Smith. You're going to have to go into those coffers again, whether it's Jeffrey Kessler with you or whomever, and you're going to go to court to fight on behalf of the players so they don't have to meet with Roger Goodell as it pertains to substance abuse and the integrity of the game per se, because obviously if you're trying to cheat in any way, that's something that has to be addressed. I'm saying that if the commissioner and the National Football League wants to sit down and talk to a Clay Matthews, a Julius Peppers, a James Harrison, a Mike Neal, who's a free agent, then guess what? You go ahead and you do that, because you're fighting a losing battle to me if you're making the claim that I don't have to meet with you. You want to lean on a collective bargaining agreement. Obviously, there's two different interpretations of it. But if Peyton Manning is already on the record, they're saying that he went through the process and he's been cleared and he can move on with his life. How true that is or not is irrelevant to me. They're acknowledging in their mind that they believe he went through due process. Therefore, the rest of the players who are still playing in this league need to go through the due process of being interviewed by us, as opposed to issuing a statement and being able to rely just upon that. To me, fighting this is just another example of the contentious relationship that exists between Roger Goodell and DeMaurice Smith, and the players are ultimately the ones who end up getting screwed over, because those dollars that are in your coffers that are never as deep as the pockets of the owners, who obviously finance the commissioner's office, the league office, and all things pertaining to that, it's a losing battle. That is the way that I view it. You guys go ahead.
Let me just say that you talk about due process. And my first reaction, my gut reaction, is what yours is, which is that, come on, guys, just cooperate with the investigation, or do you have something to hide? This is pretty straightforward. The league seems reasonable when they say there's no dispute that players are obligated to cooperate with the league's investigation. You have to give meaningful responses, etc. Not just come in and be interviewed, but actually answer questions. That all seems very reasonable. But it's, when you talk about due process, it's kind of like saying someone's accused of a crime. Why are they lawyering up? Because there is something called due process. And when the league says there's no dispute that you have to cooperate and you have to come in and talk, actually there is a dispute. As Mike Florio laid out the case in Pro Football Talk really well, I thought, about what constitutes enough evidence to impel a player to come in and talk on the record. In fact, it's if he's guilty of a crime, or if the league has enough evidence to suggest to the commissioner that he could be, not just a media report that suggests that it might be the case. That doesn't constitute enough evidence, it certainly would seem, but that the league has independently somehow, or by some other, found evidence to suggest that the commissioner really does have a reason to get these guys to make statements, and then even then, that's part of an appeals process under the PED policy. Now, there's a separate issue about the kind of broad powers that the commissioner has under the integrity of the game rule, right? Like for the integrity of the game. That's what people keep bringing up when it comes to Goodell in these situations. But again, there has to be some kind of evidence of guilt first, not just a media report. In the case of Tom Brady, they confiscate footballs, they find air pressure different. That's a little different than here, where Al Jazeera has a report and now the commissioner wants them to come and answer questions.
Well, let me say this, that when you look at the events that have transpired, there was a catcher in baseball, Taylor Threadbare.
I don't recall.
Catcher.
Okay.
Don't recall. That's close to enough to his name.
Okay.
He was suspended 80 games for being mentioned in this report. Okay? And the NFL in this particular case, whether we like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, has the hammer. They have said, you're either going to talk to us or we're going to suspend you. That's the rule. And the NFL's powers have been further enhanced over the last few months by the Adrian Peterson decision, by the Tom Brady decision.
Both overturned.
So the NFL is using the powers that have been exercised through the CBA, that have been granted to them, that have been affirmed by the courts, and they're saying, you're going to talk to us or we're going to take action. Now, again, I don't know what evidence they do or don't have. I don't know what the players did or didn't do. I'm telling you the way they're laying it out.
And they have legal precedent because they were upheld, not overturned. The decisions were upheld by the courts, and so so now that's why the NFLPA
it was
is
upheld,
fighting
but the ruling that was initially in favor of a Brady, of Adrian Peterson was overturned.
That's why the NFLPA has spent all that money fighting it, because they don't want the league to be able to point to precedent over the rule of law, which seems to be in black and white, not arguing for the commission.
Let's go back to Adam here. This is Jared Bell's column. He's talking about the union is concerned about precedent.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Charlie Sly, having, his accusations were not verified.
Fair.
Therefore, the NFLPA agreeing to these interviews, more could follow in the future based on allegations. That's their position, whereas the NFL contends that this is due diligence. Although the players submitted statements in July that reiterated their positions of innocence, it didn't provide the exchange of dialogue that the NFL seeks that will be fueled by follow-up questions. So what are we saying here? Let's go through all the minutia. Essentially what you're saying, if you're the players, is that, look, we issued a statement that in and of itself should be more than enough. Who the hell are you that you think you get to make that decision? It's not the court of law. It's the court of the NFL. Correct me if I'm wrong, Adam Schefter. The CBA is the Bible. I mean, it is.
But they're pointing to the CBA.
But listen,
the players are pointing to the CBA.
Wait. The Players Association usually points to the CBA. You have a point when you're talking about dollars and cents and what you're trying to hide or what's owed to us, etc. But when you're talking about player behavior, when you're talking about things that could potentially have compromised the league, that's at the discretion of the commissioner. Now, you can argue and you can fight it, but think about what they're fighting here. They're literally fighting going to his office and sitting down and talking.
But no,
do you have the nerve? I mean, do you really? I mean, can we just put that in its proper perspective? You are literally fighting as a players association. Correct me if I'm wrong, Adam. You are literally fighting as a players association to avoid going before the commissioner and answering questions.
And I'll tell you why.
That's ridiculous.
No, I'll tell you why. On the surface, it seems ridiculous, but think about it for a second.
They're calling any player they want at any time.
Yes, no. In other words, why should you be forced to respond to hearsay in the absence of any evidence? Now, if the commissioner's office wants to put, or the NFL wants to put forward evidence, aside from the Al Jazeera report where they say this is enough to force us to ask you to make us feel like we need to ask questions and to compel you to come in and answer those questions, that's one thing. But the union is fighting the idea that you can just call us in to talk to us about whatever.
The union's doing exactly what it should be doing. And the NFL is trying to exercise its right. Again, I brought up that catcher, Taylor Teagarden, suspended 80 games, was named in this report. I don't know what he did and didn't do either, but he was suspended for 80 games by Major League Baseball after that league looked into the situation. I don't know what the situation is here, but again, the NFL wants to find out. So the NFL has said very clearly, you're going to talk to us by August 25th, or you're going to be suspended by August 26th.
And the only point that I'd like to make in terms of jumping off the Adam Schefter, Max Kellerman bandwagon is on this one nugget. The union is doing the right thing here. I disagree with that because if you're fighting,
what should the union be doing?
What I'm saying is this. Go talk to them. If the league wants to have a conversation with you. Now, if they want to punish you.
If the cops take someone off the street and say, we want to come have a conversation without your attorney present, for example, is that always a smart thing to do?
Wait a minute. The NFL. Hold on, wait a minute. You brought it up. The NFL in no way said that the union can't be present to my knowledge. They didn't sit there and say DeMaurice Smith or Jeffrey Kessler or one of their lawyers, general counsel, whomever. They didn't say they couldn't be in attendance. What they said is, we want to talk to you. So at the end of the day, this has become a national story because you don't want to sit down and talk with your employer. Can we put it in its proper perspective?
No, I don't think that's what it's really about.
Really?
This is a proxy war being fought with these guys as pawns.
At the expense of the players' dollars.
Yes, the battle is being fought between the NFL and the NFLPA. And what's at stake is the NFL wants to reinforce precedent that's already been found so they can do whatever they want whenever. And the NFLPA is saying, no, we're resisting that so we can enforce what we believe is in the contract.
All I'm saying, presenting both sides, I understand where both sides are coming from. Look, Ryan Zimmerman and Ryan Howard, that same case, right?
That's right.
Both fully cooperated when Major League Baseball wanted to question them. So the league is making its request. If the players have nothing to hide, you go talk to them.
No, first of all, Major League Baseball, I don't know how exemption from antitrust affects that legally. I don't know. I'm not an attorney. But, all the leagues show that if you cooperate, you are treated more leniently. That in and of itself is not a good enough reason to cooperate if you're a players' union and you're trying to enforce what you believe is an agreement.
Let's take it a step further. Did Peyton Manning get let off the hook here?
I think that Peyton Manning, you can make a legitimate argument that he got let off the hook. I would make the argument that he was probably innocent. To me, I'm going to give Peyton Manning the benefit of the doubt. I'll be the first to admit it. You got an illustrious 18-plus year career. You know, you're the greatest regular season quarterback in history. You're a two-time Super Bowl champion. You've been a model citizen throughout your entire career in the National Football League. If there was ever an individual who deserved the benefit of the doubt, it is him. However, my thing is Peyton Manning will be synonymous with football. Adam Schefter, this man does direct TV commercials for the NFL ticket package. I mean, you're going to see him advertised all over the place. His illustrious career, he's excellent. His relationship with the NFL will operate into perpetuity because of his greatness, because he's a member of that quote-unquote first family, which is the Mannings. So if you're sitting there and you're talking about all of these other guys, then obviously you have to mention Peyton Manning's name. But again, the NFL said, we spoke to him. We've investigated the matter. It's going. So if anything, Peyton Manning incriminates the players in this particular instance just as much as anything else, because unlike them, apparently he has spoken to the league, and the league
you just pointed out maybe one of the reasons why he feels comfortable speaking to the league. Not only do they kind of,
but is there
an implicit promise of more leniency if you cooperate and you talk to them, but also you just said it. He's in the first family. He's the leading member of the first family of the NFL. He expects that his relationship, I assume, would go farther than the relationship that some of these other players have with the NFL.
Well, look, I think right now the NFL and the NFLPA are in a position where they are not in concert. They don't agree on anything, and they're going to find every issue they can to be at loggerheads. And this is just the latest example. If the NFL said, we want to talk to you on Tuesday, the NFL said, we're not talking any day. If the NFL said, we don't want to talk to you, the NFLPA would say, we want to talk to you Tuesday. That's just the way that
they are. And at the end of the day, it is fair to say, I think we all can agree that the NFL's pockets are significantly bigger than that of the players. So anytime you go to court, correct me if I'm wrong, because even though I was an insider for many years on the NBA, I certainly am not an insider on the NFL. Adam Schefter, you would know this better than me. Do you recall any case where the Players Association went to court for free? Like it didn't cost them a dime? I'm just saying. Have they ever gone to court on behalf of the players where it didn't cost them any money?
I don't believe that.
I don't believe that to be the case.
Meanwhile, welcome back to ESPN's Fantasy Football Marathon, presented by DraftKings, back here on First Take. So after being the 4th overall pick in this year's NFL Draft, Ezekiel Elliott has the top-selling jersey this offseason, gentlemen, and now fantasy owners are all buying the hype, too. The expectations couldn't be much higher for Elliott, whose average draft position currently sits at 6th. So since 2001, 4 of the 37 running backs selected in the first round finished in the top 10 in fantasy as a rookie. Max, is Elliott ranked too high?
When you have him not as the first overall running back, no, but I've seen many boards where he's the first overall running back in fantasy. That's too high. Ezekiel Elliott is big time. And I say that because even with all these expectations, when you have to bet on someone to live up to the pressure, forget about the fact that he's running behind one of the best offensive lines in the game, at least on paper, and in the way they've played the last couple of years. Des Bryant, healthy, will stretch the field. Every time Romo's on the field, it's going to help. Maybe they came up with something in Dak Prescott if Romo's not available. Jason Witten's still reliable, veteran. All that is going to help Ezekiel Elliott. But putting all that aside, he's a big-time player, first ever BCS playoff format, and he's, pardon the pun, carrying his team. I mean, he's coming up big with the money on the line time after time in that playoff run. So he's big time. I get it. I expect him to perform. I do not expect him to be the best overall running back, not with Todd Gurley out there. And by the way, as good as Ezekiel Elliott was in college, the sense was not that he was Todd Gurley. Mm-hmm. I mean, the sense was Nick Chubb might have been better than Ezekiel Elliott at a time, or, that level, and Gurley was a cut above, and Gurley's going to have a huge role in his offense. Le'Veon Bell, when he's on the field, is probably going to be the best overall when he's on the field, but that's after week 4, should he stay healthy. Adrian Peterson's still getting it done. So for those who would have him the first overall running back taken, it's a little bit high, especially nowadays in fantasy with the way the stretch vertical yards go.
The year of the wide receivers.
Wide receivers are going higher.
I still don't understand where the hell you're going. Where's Ezekiel Elliott? First, second, third? Where?
I would say Ezekiel Elliott is the third running back on my draft board, but once Le'Veon Bell comes back, he's fourth.
Well, first of all, far be it from me, I'm not going to try to come across some fantasy football expert. Quite frankly, all of these years, I'm wondering what the hell everybody was so enamored with. But nevertheless, it's big time. Welcome to the fantasy club. I'll join. No problem. I don't have Ezekiel Elliott number 3. I'm here to tell you that right now. And I'll tell you why I don't have Ezekiel Elliott number 3. I'll tell you why it's damn near blasphemous why you have him at number 3, Max Kellerman. You know, despite your boxing expertise, you actually know some football, bro. I really, really don't understand how you forget certain nuggets of information considering the brilliance of you, how you articulate and elocute yourself, how you know so many different things. What number is the key number there? 1 and 11. Familiar with that number? You familiar with 1 and 11? What's 1 and 11, Max Kellerman?
Without Romo.
That was the record without Romo, okay? So we had a Darren McFadden rushing for 1,000 yards, averaging 4.6 yards a carry. Before Joseph Randle decided to rob a department store for cologne and a pair of drawers, he was averaging more than 4 yards a carry himself. It's just the truth. I'm just here to be truthful, okay? Before Joseph Randle was doing that, he started 6 games. Darren McFadden started the last 10, played in all 16 games, averaged 4.6 yards a carry, gave Dallas the number 9 rushing attack in all of football. He had over 1,000 yards, but they were 1 and 11 without Romo. So in other words, what I'm saying to you is that what are you going to do if you're an opponent of the Dallas Cowboys? You're going to hurt Romo, and I'm not wishing that for him. I swear to you, I'm not wishing that on him. But his history tells me to expect him to get hurt because he's going to get hit. He's going to fall. He's going to land wrong, whether it's on the collarbone, the rib, whatever. And as a result, maybe Dak Prescott is going to get an opportunity to prove that he belongs. So you got a rookie quarterback with a rookie running back. You got people with the offensive line, and whether it's Doug Free, Travis Frederick, Zach Martin, whomever, what you're going to do is know that Dallas Cowboys offensive line is formidable. You're going to stack the box, stack the line of scrimmage, and dare the rookie quarterback to beat you, or dare Tony Romo to remain durable enough to beat you. Ezekiel Elliott ain't gonna get the ball nearly as much. Therefore, excuse me, all of this stuff about him. And by the way, while we're sitting there talking about Ezekiel Elliott, let's be clear about something here. I like the kid. He can play. He really, really can play. I didn't think it was wise for him to get at Urban Meyer the way that he did when they lost to Michigan, but he was right. It's just that, you know, that's Urban Meyer. You got to watch your mouth just a little bit there. But then the next week he got the ball against Michigan instead of Michigan State, and you saw what he did against them. But even though I wouldn't call him this, Ezekiel Elliott is a big boy who's not the most elusive dude in the world. And yards after the catch, after contact, very impressive on the collegiate level. But we used to say the same thing to a lesser degree about Trent Richardson out of Alabama.
Oh, don't compare him to Trent.
I'm not comparing him to that.
Listen, you know you messed up, right?
I'm saying this is the NFL.
In the words of
this is the NFL.
In the words of the cops in Medicine Society, you know you messed up, right?
Whatever.
You know you messed up.
I'm waiting.
Because
I'm waiting.
You just said without Romo they were 1 and 11, right? And how many yards did McFadden have per carry?
1,000.
And it was 4.6 yards a carry.
Yes.
That's pretty good, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. So if McFadden's getting 4.6 yards a carry behind that line without Romo negating their stretch threat, right?
Who's to say Ezekiel Elliott's going to be better than McFadden? You don't know that world.
Everyone in the world
I need to see to believe.
We gotta go to break.
I haven't seen him play in the NFL yet. Can we pump the brakes just a little bit?
A little bit.
We're going to take our own look now at quarterbacks this year, and we begin with last year's points champ. We all know who that is. Cam Newton was the most owned player on championship rosters last season. He put up the most fantasy points of any player last season as he won NFL MVP. However, before you start highlighting your draft cheat sheets, history not on his side. Every quarterback with at least 10 rush TDs in a season since the AFL-NFL merger lost at least 6 rush TDs from that total the following season. But look who's here, the talented Mr. Roto, Matthew Berry in the house. Now to give us his fantasy expertise, we need you here, Matthew. Who do you think is going to be the best fantasy quarterback this season?
Hi, Molly. Yep, just popping in for a quick second to tell you it's Cam Newton. #1 fantasy quarterback last year, will be the #1 quarterback this year. He's my #1 ranked guy. Look, you talk about the regression of the touchdowns, and sure, but he's had at least 5 rushing touchdowns every season he's been in the NFL. Those are designed runs around the goal line. Last 5 years, Cam Newton, top 3 in the NFL among quarterbacks in rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. Even if it comes down from 10, he'll still be 5 or 6. Not worried about that. That high floor because of his rushing is what's kept him as a high fantasy quarterback. But what happened last year is totally different. His average depth of target, which is how far down the field he's throwing, second in the NFL, only to Carson Palmer. He was really slinging it, and now this year he gets Kelvin Benjamin back. Remember the 35 touchdown passes last year. He is a true dual threat. To me, no stopping Cam Newton. He's my number 1.
And Matthew Berry, I trust he is in our number 16, and we need to say congratulations to him. Over 1 million downloads on ESPN.com.
He's phenomenal.
Fan, right?
He's phenomenal. But I'm going to be sacrilegious here because I'm going to disagree with Matthew Berry in a second. But go ahead.
All right, so who is it? Who do you think? He's going Cam Newton as the best quarterback this season in fantasy. Who's your guy?
Cam Newton, the reigning league MVP, my top tier 2 quarterback in the NFL. I understand those who would pick him number 1, like Matthew Berry and somebody sitting across from me probably as well. We'll find out in a second. But you know me. Where am I going, Molly Wood? Where am I going? He's a bad man. I'm talking about Aaron Rodgers. Now, I was tempted to pick Big Ben Roethlisberger. Not Andrew Luck yet. He's got some things to show me. But I was tempted to pick Big Ben Roethlisberger. But of the last 7 years, he's only played the complete season twice. So I question Big Ben's durability. I don't like the fact that Martavis Bryant went out, because if Martavis Bryant had been there with him, with Antonio Brown, with Wheaton, with Ladarius Green being added there, with Le'Veon Bell not being suspended, I would have went the Big Ben route, because it would have went, whether it was Le'Veon Bell or whether it was Martavis Bryant, I would have said Big Ben is the way to go. But since Le'Veon Bell and Martavis Bryant has gotten in the way of such a prognostication, I'm going to go with my fallback default position that never lets me down. Despite a down year last year, that's a down year for Aaron Rodgers. 31 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. I mean, we're talking about Aaron Rodgers here. He hasn't thrown double-digit interceptions since 2010. He's a bad man, y'all. So let me tell you something right now. That was even last year, down year. This year, what do? They go out there to get Jared Cook. You got a new tight end. You got Jordy Nelson coming back. Okay, Eddie Lacy is not going to eat himself out of the league. And Aaron Rodgers is a damn good scrambler himself. So you got to remember, even though Cam ran for more touchdowns, obviously, Aaron Rodgers threw 10 more touchdowns than Cam Newton. So when I look at it from that perspective, and that was last year, and I think about this year and how things are going to flow this year, I'm going to say it again. He's a bad man. I'm rolling with Aaron Rodgers, number 1 as my quarterback, my number 1 quarterback in fantasy football and real life, damn it, over Tom Brady, over Ben Roethlisberger, over Cam Newton, over Russell Wilson, over all of them. He's a bad man.
You ain't lying. I mean, Aaron Rodgers, when he's all done, is going to be in the conversation as greatest who ever lived.
Okay.
That's how, I mean, you watch him now, he can do things that really no one else can do.
I appreciate the affirmation.
He is like in real life. For fantasy, to me, he's a tad conservative. I like guys who sling it a little more and are willing to take more chances. In other words, even throw more interceptions in fantasy because it gives them more opportunity to rack up fantasy points. Now,
oh my Lord.
Saying that, you'd think maybe Drew Brees. And Drew Brees is a very good candidate. Russell Wilson's more like Aaron Rodgers. Great quarterback, but also a little bit on the conservative side for me to take as my number 1 overall fantasy pick. In fantasy, I think, like it's about to be in reality, it's going to come down to the Cam Newton, Andrew Luck era. It was Aaron Rodgers at the beginning of last year who was saying, I asked him on Sports Nation, or maybe it was on the radio, I forgot already, but I asked him, who is going to supplant you as the best quarterback in the game? And we started discussing Andrew Luck, who in certain ways is a bigger, stronger version of Aaron Rodgers, but more of a gunslinger. Now, as it turns out, it was Cam Newton who made the argument to supplant Aaron Rodgers. But when I look at Andrew Luck from a fantasy point of view, the fact that he's a one-man gang there, a one-man band, from a fantasy perspective, I like. Now, remember, this is a guy, Cam Newton led with 50 touchdowns last year. 2 years ago, when Andrew Luck was healthy, he led the league with 40 touchdowns.
But
I expect some regression from Cam, not because he's great, but because it's rare that a guy's going to have 50
who's your
touchdowns.
number one guy?
And I expect Andrew Luck to end the season as the number one fantasy quarterback. Andrew Luck.
Well,
not a great offensive line.
It took you long enough to get there, but let me tell you something right now.
Not a lot of targets, but I believe Andrew Luck is the pick.
You know, I'll applaud you for making sense. You do make sense because they have no running game. Okay, they loaded up 48 picks on the offensive line, so Indianapolis clearly is on a mission to protect him. The defense is not going to be that great. As a result, may be awful. As a result, he's going to have to gunsling a little bit more in order to keep them in games. So I understand the plausibility of your argument, Max Kellerman. It makes sense. The thing is that the kind of things that Andrew Luck are going to be forced to do because he'll be facing losing propositions are the kind of things Aaron Rodgers is going to do naturally because that's just who he is and that's just the way that he is, okay? I'm going to remind you again, a down year. And the dude's QBR was 64, and the dude threw for 31 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. A down year. And that was without Jordy Nelson. That was without Jared Cook. And that was with a fat, bloated Eddie Lacy, who I believe will be better.
He lost his job.
Listen, I've interviewed Eddie Lacy in the past. I'm a fan of his. I like him. But last year, he was out of shape. Now, he might have gotten bigger because you want to have some meat on you to absorb those blows easier, but it was to his detriment. So damn it, this is what they were saying.
Okay, guys, enough.
I did not see Eddie Lacy in person. I saw him on TV, but NFL players were calling him the Pillsbury Doughboy. They were disrespecting him.
Molly, he lost his job.
They were disrespecting him. So I'll let it go. He's lost weight. He's in shape, and you're going to see dipping and dunking to him, not to mention what Jordy Nelson, the Randall Cobbs of the world, the Jared Cooks of the world are going to do.
Yes. In reality, you're right. Aaron Rodgers is the best quarterback in the world. Yeah. Maybe Cam will challenge him. Maybe in reality, you're right. But Aaron Rodgers is going to be milking touchdown leads, field goal leads all season, and Andrew Luck's going to be down 3 touchdowns because his defense is no good. Even his O-line's no good. He's going to be having to air it out in the second half.
This is the only shot that Cam has of being the number one in fantasy. That is this. Because Kelvin Benjamin has returned, and because you're going to see opposing defenses having to respect their passing game and defend their wideouts along with Greg Olsen, the tight end. The bottom line is this. Cam is going to have much more room to operate running the football. So if that is your argument, that is fine.
And passing.
Let's see if Kelvin Benjamin can get separation coming off the ACL.
But he's a big boy. He's a big boy.
If you want to win a championship, listen to me and the talented Mr. Roto. It's Cam. Welcome back to ESPN's Fantasy Football Marathon presented by DraftKings.
Hold on. We gonna wait. We want to give him his proper introduction.
Oh, there he is.
We want to give him his proper. Come on in here, man.
What's happening?
Come on now.
Robo Terrell is in the house.
What's the matter? You getting a little bit slow? You don't run as fast? What's up?
Man, I ain't got no need to run right now. What's happening?
Good to see you, bro.
Good. What's up, Max?
T.O.
You good? What's happening? What's happening?
Terrell, thank you for making time for us. We're going to get into it right now. So we're going to take a look at some of the best wide receivers. Who better to join that discussion than this man right here? So they're calling it the year of the wide receiver in fantasy. Most drafts will see Antonio Brown go first overall among receivers. Over the past 2 seasons, Brown has scored double-digit fantasy points in 24 of his 32 games. If it's not Antonio Brown, it's most likely Odell Beckham Jr., who's averaged 7+ catches to go with 110 yards and nearly a touchdown per game in his 24 career games. So take a look at the stats here. For perspective, last season, Brown had 136 receptions, 1,834 yards, and 10 TDs, leading all receivers in fantasy points with 243, while Beckham finished with the fifth most fantasy points among receivers with 217. He had less catches and yards than Brown with 96 and 1450 respectively, but more TDs. So we now welcome special guest here, Terrell Owens, to the conversation. Terrell, who do you think it's going to be? Antonio Brown, Odell Beckham Jr., or is it someone else that'll have the most fantasy points?
I would have to go with Antonio Brown, just with what he brings to the table. I mean, he's a guy that's reliable. He's been consistent. Health has been an issue for some of those guys that you've mentioned. You did mention Julio Jones, but obviously he's up there in terms of guys you want to draft for fantasy. Again, he's one of those guys that can put up some numbers. Odell Beckham Jr., I'm just looking at the number of receptions that these guys are having. I mean, 136, 96. I mean, they're slinging the ball around, you know, in the National Football League these days. So, again, if I had to think about anybody putting up some big numbers, that's Antonio Brown, because he's been consistent.
Over the last 3 years, 110-plus receptions per season. By the way, I'm going to bring this up with my man T.O. right here. I mean, I expect him in the Hall of Fame next go-round. I want to put that out there. Let's get that out the way.
Is that the biggest no-brainer?
Come on now. Let me just make sure I say that on national television again, because it needs to be said again.
How dare you? You were selfish. You were the best player on the field. You were selfish.
Before I respond to Molly's question, based off of what you said about Antonio Brown and 136, Julio Jones, 136, Odell Beckham Jr., 96, do you find yourself wishing that you were playing football at a different time? Like you didn't play back in the day, you wish you were playing now instead of back then because of how much they're throwing the football?
Oh, absolutely. I think you look at, again, those numbers. I mean, that's what pops out to me. Again, when you get the numbers, it's not even really about the yards, because I think if you look at what I did with the number of receptions that I had, I think with what I brought to the table, you know, you talk about the West Coast offense and how I was able to flourish in those systems. Again, to get a bulk of those balls,
right?
Man, there's no telling what I would have been.
Aren't they getting better? Like, listen, you aside, because Randy Moss, there are always incredibly great receivers in any era. Right. But it seems to me, maybe because of the emphasis on passing, maybe because of the rules change, it makes it easier.
Rule change.
But there also, you see high school kids making crazy catches nowadays. It's like the athletes are getting better and better. And when you look at the competition at receiver now, who's the best one? It's the last guy you saw, Demaryius Thomas or Dez Bryant. We haven't even brought those guys up because of Julio Jones and Antonio Brown and Odell Beckham. Is it my imagination, or are the receivers not getting better?
They are getting better, bigger, faster, and stronger. And I think, again, when you talk about myself, when I came out, I was labeled sort of like a prototypical type of receiver. That's how I named my clothing name after just some of those attributes. Again, that's what receivers possess. And those guys, those little kids now that are looking up to guys like myself, the Odells and Antonio Browns and Julio Jones, these are the spectacular plays that they embody, they possess. But again, there's a skill set that comes with that. So you think about just the hand, the size of Odell Beckham.
Yeah.
You look at their size in general. These are things that are allowing them to really flourish at a very high level.
And I'll tell you something else too, Max. He had 1,078 receptions in his career over 15 years. At the weight Antonio Brown is going, you're talking about a dude that's going to have over 1,500 receptions in his career. It's just insane. Yeah. Let me get back to the original question about the receiver that I would pick. I'm torn. Because Antonio Brown's a bad boy, and I'm a lifelong Steelers fan, and I know what he can do, and I know what he's going to do as long as Big Ben Roethlisberger is there throwing in the football. You got to remember, he did it last year without Big Ben Roethlisberger starting 5 games and missing 4 complete games. And then come on now. So, he did that without Big Ben Roethlisberger for a third of the season.
Right.
But here's the deal where it gets very interesting to me. Le'Veon Bell comes back. You already got D'Angelo Williams there. Mm-hmm. You got Ladarius Green, who's going to spread you defensively because he can get down the field as a tight end. Wheaton's no joke. Sammy Coates has potential. And then Antonio Brown is your number one option, but you see what I'm saying? It's weapons everywhere. So they got to make up their mind. We got one football. We're going to run. We're going to pass. When we pass it, we got to feed the beast. Even though we give it to Antonio Brown, we need to make these brothers happy, etc., etc. The reason why I'm hesitant to pick him is because the Giants don't have that problem, and neither do the Falcons. When I look at Odell Beckham Jr., Victor Cruz got groin injury. This dude, Sterling Shepard, he's a rookie.
He looks like he might be good.
He looks like he may be good. He might get some catches, but we all know where Eli is going to go, especially since they don't have much of a running game. So then I go to Atlanta. Well, where the hell's their running game? And then and by the way, my man Roddy White is no longer there. So who's the number 2? And then
I see it the opposite. I see it the opposite of that because Eli spreads the ball around and they don't have a great offensive line. No. It's getting better, but the Pittsburgh Steelers have a really good offensive line, and you got a receiver who's not going to be available, the number 2 receiver,
right?
And Le'Veon Bell's not going to be there for 4 weeks.
Let me go back to your point. Eli would spread the ball around if you had. I'm questioning who you're going to have to spread the ball to. So in other words, it's like T.O. being out there. You know, when we were excited because when T.O. went to Cincy, you had Ocho Cinco on the other side. But so you were wondering, is he going to get any touches? How many touches he's going to get? How many? No, if you in Atlanta or you in New York, where the hell you going if you Matt Ryan or Eli Manning? You going right to Julio or Odell? Am I lying?
Yep, yeah, you're right. You're going to your moneymaker. You're going to your breadbasket. And those are the guys, again, if you don't have a number 2 option and those guys are dependable, and then if you don't have a running game to go with that, then you're going to go to that target. And that's why these guys' numbers, their targets are going up every year. That's why those numbers are going up every year. And, obviously the touchdowns, depends on what they do with it. But obviously there's been a big inflation in the number and the amount of yardage.
How about, speaking of Odell, how about his nose for the end zone? Like, he still caught more touchdown passes than Antonio Brown last year. Odell is younger, he's bigger, and listen, all these receivers are incredible, but if you ask me just to eyeball it and say natural talent between Antonio Brown and Odell, I'm going Odell. He's just, he pops a
But you got to look at the system. You got to look at the system and what they have available to them and what have you. It's just like when you were playing and sometimes you had an issue with a particular quarterback here and there. What was the reason? I'm open. Give me the ball. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, if especially if you know the dude on the other side ain't on your level, you're like, wait a damn minute, what you throwing him the ball for? I'm right here.
I had to tailor my game, to the quarterbacks. Chad and I, we just went into a debate about that. Again, he had a guy that he played with for a number of years. I knew with every year or each team that I went to, I had to tailor my game around the quarterback. So being with the Niners, obviously I played with Steve Young. There was a different style of quarterback there. I played with Tim Rattay, different style of quarterback. Then you factor in Jeff Garcia. So now our whole game plan is tailored around his game. So I have to adjust my game.
Stop right there. All the quarterbacks you played with, who was the most difficult one to adjust to?
The most difficult?
The most difficult for you as a wide receiver to adjust to of all the quarterbacks you played with?
I would probably have to say Jeff
Garcia.
Yeah.
Because
he wasn't the traditional, again, when you talk about West Coast offense, you think about what has been established there from Joe Montana, Steve Young. These are drop-back quarterbacks, pocket passers. For myself, that's not Jeff's game. So as offensive coordinators and the head coach, they had to change our system based on his abilities, whether they were strengths or weaknesses. So again, when we knew he couldn't stand back there and throw it 50, 60 yards down the field. So again, we had rollout passes, we had short passes to get him comfortable, get him involved early. And then when plays broke down, then we had to adjust to his game. The West Coast system is based
So it was more about him instead of about the receivers.
So this man put up those numbers before they were slinging it like this, and with different quarterbacks all the time, not like Odell and Antonio Brown. So far in their careers, same guy under center.
So it sounds like you guys are going Antonio Brown, though. Terrell, thank you for rushing over here for the insight.
I said
Antonio, and you went
Odell or Julio.
You mentioned somebody I wanted to bring up, Julio Jones. If he stays healthy, trust me, he will be in conversation.
No question.
No doubt about it.
No question.
Welcome back. In an interview with ESPN Wisconsin's Wilde and Tausch show, Aaron Rodgers was asked if he believes the NBA culture allows players to speak their minds more than the NFL. Here's what he had to say.
I think it starts with leadership. I think Adam's done a good job promoting that type of environment, and I think some guys in the NFL are probably worried about repercussions on speaking their mind from the league.
Aaron Rodgers, very complimentary, Stephen A., of Adam Silver. What did you make of his comments?
Well, first of all, Aaron Rodgers is qualified to make the statement that he made. He's an elite player in the National Football League, one of the more marketable products the National Football League has, therefore exposed to a lot of different things, some of the nuances involving the NFL. It's definitely plausible, very, very believable. But I do think that it's important to recognize that when Aaron Rodgers says something like that and you point the finger at the NFL has proven time and time and time again that they are about their money, that they are about the bottom line. And if there's someone or a product that's reticent or apprehensive about players taking on specific positions and what have you, social and otherwise, then it's one of those situations where they're saying it's going to affect the bottom line. You all want a part of this money, a chunk of this money. This is ultimately what's going to compromise our bottom line. You compromise our bottom line, we're going to compromise yours. It's not great. It doesn't make the NFL look very flattering. but it does make them look as if they are about their business, and nobody in America, this capitalistic society that we're living in, is going to consider that a crime against them. Having said all of that, where it took me to and where it hit home for me was an article I read in the New York Daily News. I think the gentleman's name was Ebenezer Samuel. He does a lot of good work for the New York Daily News, and I'm certainly not here to cast any aspersions on him. But I definitely respectfully disagreed with his position, because the title of his article in yesterday's New York Daily News was "Cam Newton's Stardom Has Turned Him Blind to Racism." And he was making the point that Cam Newton should speak up and should speak out, and that instead of doing so, he wants to be tone deaf. And he's alluded to Michael Jordan being tone deaf in the past, and Derek Jeter being tone deaf in the past. I think it's important that people like himself and others, and I respectfully say this because, again, I understand different points of view. I'm just coming from a different perspective. I think it's important that they understand that there isn't one way, just one way to skin a cat. For example, when we look at Michael Jordan, let me tip him and others who feel the same way he felt about Michael Jordan off to something. Michael Jordan may not have been the most outspoken person in the world. There may have been times where various people from the African-American community wish that Michael Jordan was outspoken. But we also applaud and appreciate his charitable contributions. And more importantly than anything else, we appreciate the fact that he hires folks from the African-American community. He doesn't just talk, or he's not about giving lip service. He's about employing folks. So would we like Michael Jordan to be more outspoken? Sure. But does that mean we diminish the level of appreciation we have for him for not only making sure that he employs African Americans, but also he was never shy about connecting himself to an African American? You want to talk to Michael Jordan in the media, and I have been blessed and fortunate enough to interview him. I'm one of the few people he talks to. Mike Wilbon is very close with him, but ain't nobody Ahmad Rashad. You see what I'm saying? So when you see a lot of these athletes, modern day and otherwise, what you see is a connection. And let me be very, very clear. We're not promoting anti-anything. But when you come from a disenfranchised community whose numbers have dwindled, making only 13% of the population, when we lament the fact that there's a lack of opportunities or African Americans in certain positions, and you have an elite figure within our community who goes about the business of not just employing folks from our community, but connecting yourself with individuals from our community. So if you want to know something about Michael Jordan, you're going to hear from Ahmad Rashad. You want to know something about Michael Jordan, you're going to hear from Michael Wilbon. You want to know something about Michael Jordan, you're going to hear it from Stephen A. Can you say the same about Tiger Woods? Not so much. And so when you look, people from our community look at things like that. And what I would say to folks that would say the same things or similar things about Cam Newton, I would say pump the brakes. Cam Newton is a young brother who is a superstar football player who's had his share of troubles in the past and has overcome it with such fervor and such impressive behavior as well as performance that he should be far more applauded than ridiculed for what he doesn't do. He is not a finished product. He is in his mid-20s. Let's be careful about what we say about him and how much pressure we're willing to heap on him, especially in light of what Aaron Rodgers just said about the NFL. Because Cam Newton wants to make his money, but he also wants to make a difference, but he also wants to be smart enough and wise enough to do it in a way that doesn't derail what he's coming at you with. He wants to make sure to elevate it to another level. At some point in time, that means him not always doing things the way we would suggest he do it and with the speed and the timing that we would expect it. Aaron Rodgers highlighting the adversarial position that may put a player in with the National Football League is something that's worth noting because it is very real. And if it is real for a superstar white quarterback, you damn sure know it's real for Cam Newton. So I appreciate what Aaron Rodgers had to say because it was very enlightening and it was appropriate.
I want to start with what Aaron Rodgers had to say, then get around to your point about Cam Newton. Aaron Rodgers here is bringing up leadership and pointing to Adam Silver. This is a point I made a couple weeks ago when we talked about this. Think about what Adam Silver did when the Donald Sterling thing went down. Now, on its face, you could argue that's not enough to kick him out of the league. And I was thinking, damn it, I know what's going to happen in this situation. It always does. It'll be a slap on the wrist, even if it's some suspension or $1 million fine some rich guy can pay. And Adam Silver got up there and said, these players are our business partners. I'm paraphrasing. And someone just deeply offended our business partners. Goodbye. And he used it as an excuse to get rid of a guy who was really a bad influence in the NBA, and Donald Sterling. Good riddance, Donald Sterling. And he did it out of respect to the players. Now, contrast that to Roger Goodell, who takes this paternalistic attitude toward the players. And yes, I understand it's part of the difference between the NBA culture and how they view the players as commodities versus, and they build them up as stars, versus the NFL, where it's about the uniform and the shield more than it is about the individual players. I get all that. That's consistent with both philosophies. But still, Adam Silver showed leadership in such a way that it emboldened the players, largely an African-American league, the NBA, to come out and speak out against what they feel, and properly, social injustice. If they were not so empowered by Adam Silver, would they have come out the same way? Maybe yes, maybe no. It's hard to say. For those who would look at LeBron James and say, well, it's easy for that guy to take the position he does now, and now getting around to your Cam Newton, Michael Jordan point, versus Michael Jordan, who was, in the 1980s especially, the countercultural revolution after the 50s, the 60s and 70s, there's all this upheaval. By the time you get to the Reagan 80s, things had changed a bit, and the dominant culture was corporate, and it wasn't as easy for a guy like Michael Jordan, even if it was in his personality to make social stands, as it was for, say, someone like Muhammad Ali or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, right? The climate wasn't right. And so it's kind of easy now to say, well, the climate is right for a guy like Adam Silver to be more permissive about this, or even encouraging. The climate is right for LeBron James to take a stand. Don't judge Michael Jordan so harshly. The climate is right in the NBA for LeBron James to take a stand. Don't judge Cam Newton so harshly, because the climate isn't right in the NFL. Those things are true. But even if the climate is right, it still takes individuals making choices, making courageous choices oftentimes, in order to bring about change. Adam Silver made a choice to get rid of Donald Sterling, to encourage athletes taking social stands in the NBA. Roger Goodell makes a choice to essentially discourage that kind of stuff and influence guys like Aaron Rodgers and Cam Newton, perhaps, to not be so emboldened to take those stands. So, yes, the climate has something to do with it, but individual choices do too. I applaud Adam Silver and LeBron James, and I have much less praise in that respect for Roger Goodell.
Before we go, it's very important that I make a couple of points. A, Adam Silver is a good man. He's the right successor for David Stern. When you think about Adam Silver, do not hesitate to credit David Stern for the climate that he created that empowered the commissioner of the National Basketball Association to deal with those 30 owners in certain ways. Even though the commissioner is answerable to them, David Stern built a level of cachet that was transferable to Adam Silver, that positioned Adam Silver to have the power that he had. Roger Goodell didn't have that luck. Let's also make sure that while I give Adam Silver a lot of credit, and again, he's a good man and a good commissioner, don't twist it. It wasn't Adam Silver first, then LeBron James and them who followed. It was Chris Paul, the Players Association. I am telling you what I know. I know you're not debating it. I'm just telling you. I'm telling you what I know. It was Chris Paul working behind the scenes. It was LeBron James speaking out. It was those players making it very, very clear that they were going to do something. And let us not forget that the one negative about Adam Silver, and it's not about him, because it ain't his fault, we never got a public vote where the owners, we saw who were in favor of Donald Sterling and who were in favor of letting him go and who were in favor of keeping him. Adam Silver never gave us that. And Roger Goodell's got to answer to NFL owners who think so.
I don't want to make it sound like I'm not giving Chris Paul and them the proper credit for showing leadership.
No, of course. And we all applaud Aaron Rodgers for speaking up. Welcome back to ESPN's Fantasy Football Marathon presented by DraftKings. We are now in hour 17. How about that? Mark Schlereth in the house. Colin Kaepernick sat out San Francisco's preseason game against the Texans with shoulder soreness as he recovers from shoulder surgery, and two sources called it a dead arm. According to our Adam Schefter, Chip Kelly says it's not long-term, it's day-to-day, and that he feels better as he goes, but they aren't going to push him, so Cap can have a proper evaluation. Oh, Mark, how we doing?
I'm doing good. How are you guys?
Thanks for joining us. Always good to see you.
Welcome to the show, man. It's always good to see you.
Been on since
Used to seeing you on the West Coast.
Yes. Yeah.
He prefers seeing you in Bristol.
Does he?
Yes, he does.
You know what? I feel like that's not true.
Max, Mark, let's not beat around the bush. Is Colin Kaepernick, is the career done in the NFL?
Absolutely not. No, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. Number one, you're so busy rehabbing your opposite shoulder that you get into camp and you start throwing. I mean, that's not what you're really working on when you're rehabbing other injuries, which he's had plenty of. And so the dead arm is to be expected to some degree because you haven't built up the requisite arm strength to basically get yourself through camp because you've been rehabbing other injuries. So that's not a Colin Kaepernick issue. That arm strength and his arm will come back eventually. I think the big thing for me, the takeaway from Sunday night's game between the 49ers in that game, and I thought the biggest takeaway for me watching the 49ers was Colin Kaepernick actually advanced in the competition between he and Blaine Gabbert based on the way Blaine Gabbert played. Like, he sat on the sideline, and I thought he gained in the competition because Blaine Gabbert was that bad. Yep. And, you know, it's interesting. Blaine Gabbert, 4 of 10, and he had the one long touchdown pass to Vance McDonald. But here's the deal. They probably set up 3 or 4 just easy connections. I mean, easy connections. Little swing pass out of the backfield. He was so awful. There were 4 of his 6 incompletions that didn't even come close to getting to a wide receiver. So I've got, or a running back, or the intended target. So I've got to believe they're sitting there in San Francisco right now going, man, let's rub buttermilk on Colin Kaepernick's arm and do whatever we need to do to get this guy right because we need this competition to be legit because Blaine Gabbert right now, based on just that first preseason game, and they ran it exceptionally well, San Francisco did, just based on that game alone, you'd have to look at it and go, wow, we're in trouble right now at the quarterback position.
Let me tell you something. Our former colleague here, Chris Carter, was very fond of saying every Sunday morning, Blaine Gabbert stinks.
Right.
What he would say. Blaine Gabbert did nothing to disprove that notion in this first preseason game. He did look awful. But I think Colin Kaepernick is done in San Francisco. He may not be done with his NFL career,
okay,
but I think he's done in San Francisco. And here is why. His skill set, or whatever you want to call it, he can run the football. He isn't the most accurate thrower. His athleticism, his success primarily predicated on his athleticism. One would surmise that that helps you playing for Chip Kelly. The flip side to it, however, is what do we always say about Colin Kaepernick? Attitude, ability to ingratiate himself with teammates, players, and win. A losing situation is not going to lend itself towards Colin Kaepernick becoming a better quarterback for his third coach in as many seasons. It's just not going to work that way. I don't see it happening, and I think that ultimately the end is near. He wanted out for a reason. They couldn't work out something in Denver. I think that they're going to be stuck with Blaine Gabbert because I don't think Colin Kaepernick.
On the surface, I can't figure this out. I know there are contractual reasons and money reasons. Often that's the case in the NFL, Mark, but Chip Kelly is studying Kaepernick in Nevada because he wants to run that kind of system.
Right.
He doesn't have that kind of quarterback in recent years in the NFL. He gets the job on the surface. From where I'm sitting, I'm going, oh, look at that. They wanted to work with Kaepernick. He's got the guy there now. He has a terrible option in Blaine Gabbert, and still they can't make it work with Kaepernick? What am I missing?
Right. No, I think you can. I mean, obviously, he's got to get healthy enough to be able to actually compete for this job. That's number one. But I think there are a couple of things when you look at Colin Kaepernick just from a pure mechanical standpoint. He's got a real elongated motion. And people always talk about becoming a real drop-back quarterback and changing those things. You get to this point in your life, you kind of are what you are. I don't know that you ever really change that. Can you mitigate it? Can you manage it based on the play action, based on the running game, based on all those different things that you're trying to do?
Especially when you don't have the personnel to go with it.
If you're Chip Kelly, I believe you can manage those things, and you can
manage to get to a Super Bowl, Colin Kaepernick.
Right, but that's what I'm saying, in that style of offense. So, yeah, I would think that they would have a desire in San Francisco to have Colin Kaepernick actually at least compete for this. One, because Blaine Gabbert is what he is at this point also. I don't think, there's very few times over the course of my NFL career and then being an NFL analyst where I've actually seen a reclamation project, where I've seen, a guy like Rich Gannon go from journeyman to MVP. It just doesn't happen very often. And I don't think that's going to happen with Blaine Gabbert. So I just think this is still going to be a wide open competition.
Yep. So not done in the NFL, Stephen A. You just think he might be done
I think he's
with
done
the
in San
49ers.
He's done in San Francisco.
Welcome back to ESPN's Fantasy Football Marathon presented by DraftKings. So we had Mel and Todd breaking down the rookies. And so far we've talked about quarterbacks and wide receivers. So now we want to look at those running backs. Adrian Peterson was the top fantasy running back in 2015 despite being 30 years old. He led the league in rushing yards and tied for the league lead in rushing TDs. Now he's 31. And only 4 running backs in the last 20 seasons have produced 200 fantasy points in a season at that age. He helped the Vikings win the NFC North last season, so can Peterson carry the team back to the playoffs? For that question, hello, Matthew Berry. We welcome Matthew back. Barry, what do you think here? Who's the best fantasy running back this year?
Hi, Molly. I think there's a lot of people that you could choose. My number 1 ranked running back is Adrian Peterson. And it's not necessarily because of his ceiling, but because of his floor. We always talk about in fantasy, you can't win your league in the first round. You can lose it. You want safe. And that high floor for Adrian Peterson, every single season that he's played more than 1 game in the NFL, he scored double-digit touchdowns. Yes, he is 31. He's also inhuman. This guy had the second best NFL rushing season in history 9 months after an ACL. So you think about that offense that they run in Minnesota. They want to run the ball, play good defense, win close ball games. Being indoors this year will certainly help Peterson, and adding Laquan Treadwell, another year of Stephon Diggs, Kyle Rudolph. They're adding to that passing game. Teddy Bridgewater a little more comfortable. I think they'll spread the offense a little bit more. Adrian Peterson, very safe. He's my number 1 running back in fantasy this year.
Matthew Berry on hour 17, still not skipping a beat. Thank you kindly. As I said earlier, I trust in that man there with AP. But Mark Schleyer, I want your thoughts here. Who do you think is going to be the best fantasy running back?
Listen, man, Adrian Peterson, you can never go wrong with him. Le'Veon Bell, I don't know about the suspension or the potential suspension. You can't go wrong with him. I'm looking more at value guys. Todd Gurley is another guy that, is great. We all assume that Ezekiel Elliott will be great. But what about guys that are in systems that you know are going to touch the ball a ton? A guy like Doug Martin, you know he's going to get run. Jameis Winston should be better in year 2, even though I thought he was pretty spectacular for a rookie last year. So they should be better as an offense. He should get plenty of run. C.J. Anderson in Denver, he's going to be the bell cow. Gary Kubiak likes to give one back the majority of that workload. He's looked great in camp, a revamped offensive line. So you'd have to look at guys like that. Where can we look at the bottom of this thing? Think about this. Chip Kelly, before he traded away all his good players when he was in Philadelphia and got a guy that didn't fit in his system, in DeMarco Murray, right? Think about them. They were the league leader in rushing yards his first 2 seasons. So what about Carlos Hyde? I know that.
David Johnson.
There you go, David Johnson, Arizona. But Carlos Hyde is a guy that's really intriguing to me if he can stay healthy. And we say that a lot about these running backs. But here's a system that's really difficult to defend with not only the rapid nature with which you call plays, but also in that zone system with a quarterback that can run. It opens things up. It spreads things out. So there's potential for big chunk gains with a guy like Carlos Hyde. And he can run that east-west system that DeMarco Murray really wasn't a fit for in Philadelphia. So those are some value guys at the end of the first, maybe second round, where you can really get good value in my mind for the running back position.
I think the answer is Todd Gurley. I love your Doug Martin pick in terms of value. Lamar Miller, too. Like, you got some guys you can get, you don't have to use the top pick on. It could give you good production. But Todd Gurley, look, Ezekiel Elliott's on the top of a lot of guys' boards, a lot of people's boards. But even in college, was Ezekiel Elliott ever considered Todd Gurley? Todd Gurley is a kind of generational talent, in my opinion. And Adrian Peterson's one of the best who ever did it, but he's 31 years old. And Minnesota's going to look to throw the ball more as Bridgewater develops. So there's Peterson. Le'Veon Bell should be the number 1 pick, but he's going to miss 4 games. So there you go. That severely diminishes. And that's a bigger chunk of the regular season fantasy schedule than even of the real schedule. So I look at Todd Gurley and think that's just the most talented guy. He's already had a year in the league. He's their whole offense, and I think he should be the number 1 running back taken.
For me personally, the name that jumps out to my mind is David Johnson for Arizona. I thought about Todd Gurley a lot, but he's playing for Jeff Fisher, and they have a rookie quarterback that ultimately will get stacked. I could see people stacking the line of scrimmage and trying to impede Gurley because he's their ultimate threat, even though Tavon Austin is nothing to ignore. But I think they've got issues with the Los Angeles Rams and Jeff Fisher. He has to prove something to me. I think Gurley's going to get his, but I don't know if I would pick him number one. Adrian Peterson would be the safe pick because Teddy Bridgewater is still developing, but he's basically a game manager to some degree. They've got some issues with their wideouts. Got to find who's that guy, who's that stud to throw the football to. So therefore, Adrian Peterson's going to get a lot of the touches. That's a safe bet. I don't think anybody could argue with that. But I think you look at Doug Martin, like you said. I think Lamar Miller in Houston would be impressive because even though Brock Osweiler and DeAndre Hopkins are there, Brock Osweiler is going to have something to prove. I can see Bill O'Brien running the football, but Lamar Miller, he's a big back, but he goes down easily, and that's one of the problems. Even though he's a big boy, you hit him, he's not getting too many yards after hits or whatever the case may be. I look at a guy like David Johnson, and here's what jumps to my mind. I think about Chris Johnson. I got these numbers in here. We saw the season that Arizona had, 13-3 last year. Carson Palmer throwing for 4,671 yards, completing better than 63% of his passes. Larry Fitzgerald, John Brown, Michael Floyd. Right. We know Jermaine Grisham. We know that these guys can play. You know that Carson Palmer won't hesitate to go deep. So they're not going to stack the line of scrimmage against Arizona like they would do against most teams. They have to respect that passing game. If you are Bruce Arians, what you're going to do is use that as an excuse to run the football. And when you look at David Johnson, he only rushed for 581 yards last year, but he only started 5 games. He averaged 4.6 yards a carry. And here's what jumps out of my mind. In those 5 games, 36 receptions, 457 yards. I mean, he played 16 games, but he started 5 games. 36 receptions, 457 yards. He's a dual threat. And now he's going to be one of the primary benefactors in that Arizona offense. I think he will see the ball more. I think Chris Johnson and Andre Ellington will get less reps, less touches. It's going to be about David Johnson, and I think that's the reason why you go with somebody like him.
I think one of the things that's interesting about that offense is they run more condensed formations than anybody else in football. And you think about that's counterintuitive when you think about Bruce Arians, because they want to throw the football down the field. For every check down, there's a touchdown. It's touchdown, 2 check down. I mean, that's how they operate their offense. They're going to take their chances. But so many condensed formations with tight ends in line, with Larry Fitzgerald motioning down and setting an edge. I mean, he's one of the most unselfish, if not the most unselfish player in all of football, certainly the most unselfish wide receiver in all of football. And when you have that, because you still have the threat of the speed outside, you get guys in that box. The outside, they get more outside big runs than I think any other team, because once they break contain, because they are in condensed formations, people are so nervous about the speed on the outside that, man, these guys hit it. And there is nobody to the outside to contain these running backs. And you saw it with Chris Johnson last year. You saw it as he got hurt in the transition they made to David Johnson. I think that's a great pick. I think he could be big this year.
Yeah, the only
Not
thing about
bad
Arizona,
for an amateur fantasy player.
You're killing it. I'm impressed.
Arizona has a deep and diverse kind of offensive weapons. But as a result, for fantasy, not always the best pick. Like, please,
well, look,
when we draft, take David Johnson. Let me take Todd Gurley.
But it's really, when you think about fantasy, because I'm a novice with fantasy football. Right. I've never been in a league or whatever the case would be. But you pay attention to these numbers. I mean, fantasy is the kind of thing you're talking about when you're in the barbershop or at a barbecue or something like that. These are the kind of things you're talking about. It's really very simple to me. The bottom line is this. If you're going to touch the ball more than anybody as a running back, and you are a dual threat, and as a result, because of that, the quarterback is going to be looking to throw you the ball to take some of the pressure off of himself and to capitalize off the fact that the deep threat is going to the opponents are going to attempt to neutralize that. Then that ultimately makes you more valuable.
A bell cow that can catch passes out of the backfield.
Especially for PPR leagues. But you brought up a great point about value, especially this year with all the receiver depth. I feel like people aren't going to necessarily take running backs right away as early.
Right, and I'll give you one more. Chris Ivory. Don't sleep on him. That guy's forehead is made of concrete. He's got rebar in it. And I'm telling you.
I'm sleeping a little bit?
I'm telling you, they're a physical football team right now. They've rectified some things in Jacksonville right now.
Yeah. Jacksonville's very impressive with the athletes that they've got there. Gus Bradley, we're going to find out about him this year because you got the talent there. But I will say this about Chris Ivory, and I know Chris Ivory can play.
My issue is that, you know what? Why the Jets lose him? Why the Jets lose him? If anybody needed him, it was the Jets with Geno and ultimately an unproven Ryan Fitzpatrick before last year. Why is he gone from the Jets? That's what stays with me.
Get expensive.
I wouldn't mind getting Blake Bortles either for a quarterback.
I don't know if that's the only
Could
reason.
be a good fantasy. So let's finish our fantasy show here with a little discussion on tight ends, gentlemen, shall we? In the last 2 seasons, Rob Gronkowski has scored 79 more points than any other tight end, but injuries are always a factor, with Gronk causing him to miss 1 game in each season. Gronkowski took himself out of joint practice with the Bears yesterday, but according to our Adam Schefter, the injury does not appear serious. My friend Matthew Berry back with us. Hello, Matthew.
Hi, Molly.
All right, so here's the question for us. Gronkowski, is he going to be the #1 tight end in the league this season? What you think, Matthew?
Of course he is. Like, just stop on the no Gronk thing. Like, love you, Max, but you're nuts on this one. I have to say that one of the reasons that Gronkowski is so highly thought of is that he doesn't actually play tight end. He lined up at wide receiver almost 80% of the time last year. By the way, no team in the NFL runs more 2 tight end sets than the New England Patriots. Rob Gronkowski, that offense, one of the best, if not the best offense in football, runs through Gronk. 4 out of the last 5 years, Rob Gronkowski has either been the best or second best tight end in fantasy. A lot of people say, well, what about Martellus Bennett? Is he going to take some targets? 2011 was Rob Gronkowski's best season. Aaron Hernandez was the 3rd best tight end in fantasy that same year. That offense can easily support 2 tight ends having productive fantasy seasons. Not worried about Tom Brady missing 4 games. Jimmy Garoppolo is no moron. When he's under pressure, he's going to be looking for Gronk. Again, that offense runs through him. It's a no-brainer. We heard from Shefty. It's not a serious injury. Rob Gronkowski is the #1 tight end, and it's not close.
Matthew, thank you. So Matthew saying, don't get cute. Go with Gronk.
Oh, it's a brainer. It's a brainer.
Oh, it is?
It is a brainer.
Okay,
yes.
so who is it?
Far be it from me to disagree with the great Matthew Berry. However, you're wrong. Look, in real life, Gronkowski's arguably the best tight end ever. I mean, he's in that conversation.
Who are you
he's
going
in that
with?
conversation. The problem is Martellus Bennett is going to take some targets away from him. That's going to happen. The problem is Gronkowski is constantly banged up. I mean, we've seen it. When he's healthy and at 100%, the Patriots are like the odds-on favorites to win the Super Bowl, and when he's not, they're not, and sometimes he's not. Greg Olsen, on the other hand, has the MVP throwing him the ball. He's by far the #1 target there. Everyone's like, Kelvin Benjamin's coming back. First of all, he's a nice receiver, a good receiver. Not exactly Odell Beckham Jr. before the injury, and he's coming off an ACL. So when you add it all up, by the way, the other thing about Greg Olsen is he's an Iron Man. He's played every game since 2007. This is his 10th year. He plays every single week. So you add up the fact that Gronkowski, I wouldn't say he's chronically missing time, but he's chronically banged up in a way that affects his performance, as great as he is. Martellus Bennett on the same team. Olsen, without as many guys taking away targets, going to play every day. I think it's very close, and Olsen edges him out.
First of all, if you're going to be sacrilegious, blasphemous, and downright disrespectful by disagreeing with the great Matthew Berry, you need to come up with a better excuse than that. Rob Gronkowski has only missed 1 game per season over the last 2 years and has still doubled up Greg Olsen in terms of touchdowns, and he's had more yardage than him. So you dropped the ball, and you made Matthew Berry turn his back on you and say, how dare him be so disrespectful?
And he left
Be
the
careful, okay? Now, here's my pick. And it's a sleeper pick, but nonetheless, I think one that could usurp Rob Gronkowski. You know this from when we were at Richmond with the Redskins camp. I'm a huge Jordan Reed fan.
Yeah.
This brother's on another level, okay? This dude catches balls in traffic. He's more elusive than Gronkowski. Gronkowski takes hits, bounces off dudes, shrugs them off, that kind of thing, and he's protective of his knee as well he should be, because that's the only way anybody can seem to take him down. But Jordan will juke you. He will catch, he will go over you. You know, he's great in traffic in terms of his foot movement. His durability is a question mark as well, because he played in 11 games 2 years ago. He played in 14 last year. Had, 962 receptions, 11 touchdowns, weeks 13 to 17. Let me pull out the book here. 32 catches, targeted 39 times, 411 receiving yards, 5 touchdowns. And you got to remember, he's a bad boy. Now, let's take this into consideration. You take that, combined with the fact that the running game, even though we think Matt Jones can play, bottom line is Alfred Morris is not there, you're definitely going to focus more on your passing attack because Kirk Cousins is in a contract year. Because he's being paid $19.95 million as your franchise guy, looking for a long-term deal. You don't prove that by handing off the football to your running back. You prove it by flinging the football. You've got DeSean Jackson, an elite deep threat when healthy. He ain't missing the first 7 games this season, so we hope he should be there. Pierre Garçon, both of them are in a contract year, so they'll be looking for touches, okay? Then you have, obviously, Cousins having something to prove, and Jordan Reed is pretty much a tight end, not Paulson or anybody else. Jordan Reed is a stud.
Yep.
He is the dude.
And Kirk Cousins throws that kind of pass, like tight end type passes, not down the field type passes.
Because DeSean Jackson is out there, you've got the safety that's got to go back in coverage, which means there's going to be room for Jordan Reed to operate even more so than the room he had last year. This is a special dude. Jordan Reed, keep your eyes on that name. I think that Jordan Reed might be considered right there with Rob Gronkowski if he stays healthy when the season is over. If he's not, it's going to be because of Kirk Cousins as opposed to Tom Brady. That's going to be the only reason. But in terms of Jordan Reed getting open, catching passes, if this dude is healthy, we will be talking about him in the same breath as Rob Gronkowski by the end of the season.
In real life.
You book it.
In real life,
yes.
And fantasy.
And fantasy.
And Travis Kelce and Delaney Walker. There's a couple options.
Well, listen, if you keep calling his number and you don't call Martellus Bennett's number, you might have a point. But if Gronkowski is used as a decoy sometimes, the way DeSean and them could potentially be used, straight up and down, Jordan Reed is going to be mentioned on the same level as Gronkowski by the end of the season if he stays healthy.
You know what I'm so excited about, besides the fact that we're at 1.1 million drafted teams here on ESPN.com? Stephen A., you've been doing such a great job talking about fantasy. We have a live show at 1 p.m. We're not going to say bye yet, and you're going to have your first draft, and I'm going to crush you. Do you have a team name yet?
You know, I don't feel like going there. Well,
have to.
Molly, listen, I'm very respectful of women. I don't want to beat you up with fantasy. My team being so superior.
Even though I'm a veteran and you're such a rookie, I cannot wait for this. 1 p.m. We're both going down. The champ is here. Thanks so much for listening to the pod. Catch First Take weekdays, 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific on ESPN2.